This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera off, but it's okay if you have the bandwidth. It's okay for you to keep your cameras on. That way, I know that it's real people I'm actually talking to, rather than just talking to my computer. But please keep yourself muted. And with that, hopefully the technology works here. All right, can everyone see my title slide here?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so for here are the topics we're going to cover. Hopefully we'll be done by 8 o'clock. It'll depend on how many questions we get. Feel free as we're going to type in questions into the chat. I've got two breaks during the presentation to go over questions, and then at the very end we can have some discussion too, if people are still interested. So we're gonna talk about why it's helpful to use native plants in your landscape and adopt a natural type of landscaping style. Some very basics about landscaping, the process of developing a landscape plan with site analysis and planning and design basics. And that's the first section of the talk, and then there'll be a break for questions at that point. And then the next section is I'll go through our common trees and shrubs, native trees and shrubs, and discuss each one of those and their attributes and how you might incorporate them into your landscaping. And then the last part is about bare root plants, primarily how to care for them and how to do site preparation, planting, and a little bit of maintenance tips. And just so you know, this is we do offer this workshop in conjunction with our native plant sale, which is all bare root trees and shrubs. So that's why the emphasis on bare root. Okay. And for those who are not familiar with conservation districts, we are a special purpose district or subdivision of state government. There are 45 conservation districts in the state of Washington. 39 counties, which is you may think is a little odd, but originally the conservation districts were created based on watershed boundaries. Although Jefferson County was never like that. It started out as East Jefferson County Conservation District and then expanded to include the western portion of the county. But was never one that was based on watersheds. There's a couple of areas in the state where the counties are divided up into more than one conservation district. But we were born out of the Dust Bowl, and the emphasis was soil erosion control, and then later water resources became a priority. Obviously, there was no Dust Bowl here on the Olympic Peninsula. But in 1946, that was 10 years after, at least 10 years after the Dust Bowl, but when we were created. And you can see our mission there, which I will not repeat, but we offer this workshop in part because we're trying to help folks with landscaping and landscaping in a more environmentally friendly way. And as I mentioned, I've been doing presentations and workshops like this since 1990, all in Clallam County up until this past year. Okay, so ideally our landscapes are, and I said I was going to turn off my camera, but I didn't. No, I'll just leave it on. It seems to be working. So ideally our landscapes are going to meet all of our needs. which is from some people that might be growing food. Obviously, that's where our food comes from, is from landscapes, but not necessarily our own backyards, but from the land. Our landscapes are a place to play and relax, and ideally we're going to be inspired by nature and be able to enjoy the beauty of our landscapes. And if we do it right, our landscapes will not only meet all of our needs, but will also be in harmony with the environment. They'll enhance wildlife habitat and biodiversity, be at least not detrimental to stormwater impacts, hopefully be beneficial with regards to stormwater management, and not be detrimental to air quality, and maybe even improve air quality. And this one is a little bit hard to grasp, but if we plant trees, the more trees we plant, the more carbon we're going to take out of the atmosphere, which is going to be good for the environment and climate change. And the less lawn that we have, the less mowing we're going to do. And mowing lawns can contribute a lot of air pollution as well as noise pollution. So this is what we're striving for. There we go. And here we have a couple of examples of what is not what we're after. You got up in the upper right-hand corner, you got a nice, beautiful landscape. You got a big, nice manicured lawn, shade trees, rhododendrons. Beautiful, but not very sustainable. Not without a lot of labor, a lot of inputs, fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, irrigation, lots of mowing. So nice looking, but not very sustainable. And then the other extreme down the lower left-hand corner, and this is a not unusual landscape to find in Sequim. I haven't seen much of this in Jefferson County, but this is fairly common in Sequim, the gravel lawn. So lower maintenance, you don't have to mow that, you don't have to irrigate that, but certainly not an inspiring landscape. Not a good place to play, hang out, not good for wildlife habitat. And even though you don't have to mow it and irrigate it, weed seeds do blow in and sprout in these landscapes. And what people tend to do to get rid of the weeds is they treat it with herbicide. So these are two extremes that we're not advocating. What we like to advocate is something that I've been calling for years, natural landscaping, which is essentially just landscaping with nature. So instead of trying to make our landscapes be something that they were maybe never intended to be, we adapt to the conditions of our individual sites. And that's why I'm going to talk so much about site analysis here shortly, because in order to landscape with nature, you have to know what nature has given you to work with. So essentially we're looking at the ecological conditions of each individual site, focusing mostly on the soils, but also looking at topography, moisture, microclimates, things of that nature, and then adapting to those conditions so that we improve our chances of success in our landscape. And then the foundation of our plant palette is native plants. It doesn't necessarily have to be entirely native plants, but if that's the core of the landscape, then you're going to have a more successful landscape that's more likely to become self-sustaining as time goes on. All right, so our landscapes, as I mentioned, hopefully they're going to be in harmony with nature, and which means that we're going to be providing habitat for wildlife species. And it's really important that we use native plants to do this, because the wildlife, our native wildlife, evolved with the native plants. And also using predominantly native plants, then we're going to have more success because they are adapted to our climate, which is fairly unique here, as well as the soils that we have and the native pests and diseases. I say native pests and diseases because there are some non-natives that have found their way to North America, and they can cause a lot of problems. So this is really what we're trying to focus on, is using native plants. So then not only will we be more successful in our landscape, but we'll be providing the habitat that our native fauna rely on. And this, if you've got deer, and I'll just say right now, if I get a bunch of questions about what to do about deer, I have no answers. I'm sorry. That's just something we have to live with. But deer are pretty adaptable, as you probably know. But there are some species that are not so adaptable. Birds, for example. The vast majority of birds, even if the adults, their diet is seeds or nuts or berries, they feed their young mostly insects, primarily caterpillars. And a lot of those caterpillars are pretty specific about what types of plants that they like, and they're the native plants. Okay. So if you are looking at ordering plants from the Conservation District, or if you've already placed an order, you will know that we sell plants in bundles of 10. And that means if you get 2 or 3 species, different species, you're getting 20 or 30 different plants. And they're all bare root, and so they got to be taken care of. So it's a good idea to plan ahead before you place that order. It's a good idea no matter what type of landscaping you're doing or where you're buying your plants from, but when you're buying large quantities, it's really important. And here are the steps in landscape design, that regardless what type of landscaping you're doing. First, you figure out what it is you want and need from your landscape. What are your objectives? Then you go out and you analyze your site, and then you try to combine those two. You do a little synthesis there. Can you achieve your objectives with what nature has given you to work with? Okay. Ideally, you can without too much manipulation or too many compromises in what it is you want to do. And what you do is you develop a schematic plan, which is just a very general plan that outlines the different functions of your landscape and what you're going to achieve where. Identify different spaces and maybe some different plant communities that you're going to work on without getting into any detail at all. And then after you've done that, then you can look at each individual space and develop a detailed design for each individual space. And that's where you identify the species that you're going to plant. If you jump ahead, as many of us have a tendency to do by buying the plants first and then trying to figure out what we're going to do with them, then you have a tendency to make some mistakes, or you just get bogged down with or overwhelmed by what you're facing. So try to follow these steps, and you'll be a lot more successful. Okay, and I just have an example here of some objectives for landscape that from my family. The little boy here in the photo, that's my son Eric. I took him yesterday down to Tacoma to catch a bus to go back to WSU. He's a freshman over at Washington State University. That's Eric and the giant spud there. So I recommend that it may seem like a unnecessary, tedious exercise, but I recommend that you write down your objectives. That way it really reinforces in your head what is highest priority for you. And also chances are there's more than one of you that has to agree on what your objectives are. And so if you write them down, then you're better prepared to do some negotiating or prioritizing on what's most important for your landscape. Okay, and then when you go out to do your site analysis, it's a good idea to have a little sketch of your property where you can take notes. Doesn't have to be to scale, but you know, roughly close enough so that you can get things figured out. And a good way to do it is you can make photocopies to do a base map and make photocopies of it, and you can do different schematic plans off of that same thing, but same base map. But here, this is a 2.5 acre parcel here. You want to have a north arrow on your map too, because orientation, where's north, where's south, is going to become pretty important with microclimate. But you just take note of various things. So maybe you've got a desirable view that you want to preserve. If you're on a on-site septic system, you want to identify where your drain field is, because you're going to have to treat that area a certain way. Maybe you have some undesirable views or something that you want to screen off. Note that. Where's the prevailing wind come from? Where do the storm winds blow from? What's the vegetation like? Is there vegetation like Himalayan blackberries that you want to try to get rid of? Some vegetation that you want to enhance. You want to enhance some views for wildlife. Note all those things, all the built resources that you have, like all the structures, utilities that are not going to move, that you're going to have to work around. Sketch those in on your base map. Nothing too complicated. And then you take you do that analysis, and then you go back and look at your objectives and see how you might be able to meet your objectives with what the site has given you to work with. So if you remember right, we had a view off in this direction that we wanted to preserve. We had a drain field out here. So a grass lawn is a pretty safe thing to have over a drain field. And you have that there, and then transition that to a more natural grassy area, and you can preserve that view and have a safe thing over your drain field. The wind was blowing off from this direction over here, and there was an undesirable view off to the north over here. So maybe you want to plant an evergreen screen to both block the view as well as provide some protection from the wind. If growing vegetables and flowers is part of your plan, you want to keep that in close near the house, so it's easier, more convenient to tend to and utilize. I've seen many times where people will plant a little orchard, and they'll do it way over here, as far away from the houses as they can for some reason. And if it's far away, it's harder to maintain it. If it needs any irrigation, it's too far away. If it needs pruning, it's going to get neglected. The fruit probably won't get picked. It's just easy picking for the deer. So try to keep those things closer in by the house where you can take good care of them. And then note if you've got wet areas. And maybe instead of battling those wet areas, you just give into it and enhance them as more natural wetlands. So this is what we call a schematic plan. These are just spaces that are identified. They're going to be treated differently. But you see there aren't any plant species identified on this map yet. And then if you've got a city lot, it might look something like this. Oh, I can't remember the guy's name again. the author of a book called Landscaping for Wildlife. He was a landscape architect and wildlife biologist, and he wrote the book Landscaping for Wildlife, and then he did a companion book, Landscaping with Wildlife, which was about how to adapt to wildlife. And he worked for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they used to have these on their website. But this is, you can see this is a city lot. That's a site analysis and a little bit of a schematic plan combined on the same map here. Low area potential for a pond, good place for play area, good for hummingbird, shady, quiet, good for sitting. Those are the types of notes that you want to be taking on your site analysis. And again, this is also incorporates some of those objectives that the landowner might have. And then you can take it a step further, and this doesn't have any of the analysis part on it. It's just got the different spaces identified, different functions that are going to happen in different parts of the landscape. Vegetable garden over here, Japanese garden here, rock garden, butterfly garden, hummingbird garden, children's play area, pond, that sort of thing. Again, there aren't any species that have been identified yet. Tall shrubs over here, that's one. Evergreen hedge over here, but doesn't say what species yet. And then this is probably not something most people are going to do, but this is a planting plan where you actually get down to identifying what species are going to go where. And if you're doing it yourself, yeah, you're probably not going to go to this length with your design and your planning. But if you're hiring someone to do your landscaping for you, you probably want them to come up with something like this. So then you can be sure you understand what it is you're going to end up with. All right, and in the site analysis, one of the more important things you're going to want to take a look at is the soil that you're dealing with. And really what you're most concerned about with the soil is the soil texture. And that's because the soil texture determines how water interacts with the soil, which determines what types of plants are going to be appropriate. So if you've got a gravelly or sandy soil, that's a coarse textured soil. It drains readily, but it doesn't hold very much water, so it also dries out very quickly. If you've got a clay soil, you might have ponded water after it rains, but it also holds moisture for a long period of time. It can hold a lot more moisture than a sandy or gravelly soil. If you're lucky, you've got a silt loam soil, which is in between the two. It's the sweet spot where it's much more forgiving than either of the two. It's got a fairly high water holding capacity, so it doesn't dry out too quickly, but it also drains relatively well. And so that's really what you're going to want to be looking at when you're looking at your soils. And the best way to do that is just to go out and dig holes and see what's down below the surface. And if you're on hilly ground, there's a pretty good chance that you might have compact glacial till, the soil that may be 2 or 3 feet deep, and then underneath that is almost like concrete, where sand, silt, clay, and gravel got compressed by the glaciers, so much so that water doesn't penetrate it. So that type of soil is going to need to be treated a little differently than the others, because it'll tend to have a perched water table in the wintertime, and then it'll dry out fairly quickly in the summertime because it is fairly shallow. All right, and then another good thing to do with your landscape planning is to divide your landscape up into zones. This will help you focus on what's most important and not get overwhelmed. And here we've got 3 zones. We got right around the house where we spend the vast majority of our time, zone 1, that's the people place or the cultivated part of the landscape. If you have a vegetable garden or fruit trees or any ornamentals that you really prize, then you want to probably have those in zone 1 or maybe in zone 2. Anything that has to be irrigated should be in zone 1. People ask, like, how big should that be? And I say, well, the length of a garden hose, no more than that. And lawn that has to be mowed regularly, try to keep that in zone 1. And then out in this area farther away from the house, that's the wild part of your landscape. If you're lucky, it's already established with native vegetation, and there's nothing you need to do there other than enjoy it. Maybe do a little bit of enhancement, but nothing else. If you're not so lucky, maybe it's old pasture or hay or something like that, then maybe you want to over time work on trying to convert that back to a more natural landscape. And then this orange, that's a transition between the more manicured part of the landscape and the wild part of the landscape. So, and it's a shared space. It's a physical and psychological transition from those two different landscape types. And here's another illustration of what that might look like. Here you've got zone 1 right around the house. That's where we spend the vast majority of our time in the house and then outside the house. And then this is the wild area over here. That's where the refuge for wildlife, where they feel safe, and we feel safe over here. And then we've got a shared space between the two, or transition from one to the other. Various species of wildlife that don't feel so comfortable being around us. They might come visit a bird feeder or a bird bath or water feature or something like that, but then they've got a safe place to go back to roost or to nest. And then also I want to point out, as you're doing your landscape site analysis, also think about what you see out your windows. Okay, like, your kitchen, from your kitchen window, where probably every day you stand at the kitchen sink and look out the window. What do you see out there? Because that's going to be a focus of your landscaping efforts. What do you walk by every day when you leave and come back to the house? Those are parts of your landscape that you notice regularly, and probably should be high priorities as far as your design efforts go. And if you got what do you see when you're sitting in your favorite chair looking out the window? You want to be able to, you want to look out on something that you're really going to enjoy. All right, so we've done the site, figured out what our objectives are, done our site analysis, and come up with a schematic plan. And now is when we start looking at the species we are interested in planting. And these are the things you want to think about in developing a planting plan. Where it makes sense, you maintain as much of the existing vegetation as you can, because it's a lot easier to keep what's there than to start all over. You might need to remove some, or you might need to modify some of it, but don't have it all bulldozed and cleared. And for a natural type landscaping, you want to keep your lawn area as small as you can. Lawn is pretty easy to get established and is a good ground cover, but it is high maintenance. So it's good in the short term, but long term, you probably don't want too much lawn. And then you're going to want to mimic natural habitat types or plant communities. And in doing that, you're looking mostly at what plants like to grow together, what are their moisture needs, and group them appropriately. Do the plants need sun? Do they tolerate shade? Do they prefer shade? Can they tolerate wind, or do they need some protection from the wind? And a good thing to do with this is to go out and look at a reference site if you can, somewhere nearby that is already established with native trees and shrubs, and see what's growing there. And there'll be overstory trees, and there'll be understory shrubs, and try to figure out what those are, and that'll give you some good guidance in your own landscape. And then when you're selecting the individual plants, you go through a little decision path. Do you want a tree or a shrub? And always be thinking about what the mature size of the plant's going to be. And then do you want it to be evergreen or deciduous? And different factors are going to come into play as to whether or not you want evergreen or deciduous. As you all know, our days are short in the wintertime, and they can be gray and not much sun. And so you plant too many evergreens, and you make it even darker and less light. So be thinking about that. There's a place for evergreens, but there's also a place for deciduous trees as well. All right, and I have a rule of thumb that I go by, where whenever I plant a tree or a shrub, I think about at least 3 functions that plant will serve by being in that particular place. And if you go through that little mental exercise, you'll avoid a lot of problems. And I just have a few of the many functions that plants serve. And again, always be thinking about the mature size of the plants. Okay, and here, this is from King County. They have an interactive plant search website. Yeah, it's a really nice website. And what you do when you go there, and I think this is still the address, but if you just Google King County Native Plant Guide, you'll get there. But what you have is you've got all these different parameters you can select from and query plants, and it's all native plants that they have. So you got plant type, you choose either tree, shrub, ground cover, grass-like, or vine, and then deciduous, evergreen, or perennial, and then moisture requirements. So getting back to your soil conditions, is it dry, moist, wet, and exposure requirements, sun, parts, shade. And then there's various other parameters you can select from as well. You click those, and a list will pop up of native plants that meet the criteria that you've selected for. And King County, they have a lot of good stuff on their website. It's Northwest Yard and Garden Native Plant Guide is what this page is here. All right, do we have any questions? I see there's one in the chat. Russell Link, yes, thank you, Becky. Russell Link is the landscape architect / wildlife biologist that wrote the landscaping for wildlife and landscaping with wildlife book. Any other questions about site analysis and site design?
I'm stuck getting to the chat, so here's my question.
Okay.
Usually see on plant guides sun and shade tolerance, but wind is a big factor in our yard, and I've never seen anything about wind tolerance.
Yeah, good question. I have not either. I only know from personal experience what plants that don't tolerate windy conditions, and I'll talk about a little bit about that as I go in the next section of the presentation talking about the individual plants.
Okay.
But yeah, I have not seen any written guidance on that. Okay, well, we will move. Oh, we got another question. How do you expect to adjust habitat plantings for our changing climate, warmer, drier summers, etc.? Well, I don't know the answer to that. I think diversity is possibly a good way to go. The more diverse the plantings, then the chances are better that you're going to have success. Things will sort themselves out. I know there's some issues with big leaf maples, and for a number of years, their big leaf maples have been in decline. And I just read recently that they've concluded that it's not any one particular thing that is causing the problems with the big leaf maples, but it's probably hotter, drier summers are weakening or causing more stress on the maples, and so their immune systems are not as strong as they would normally be, and so they're more susceptible to pests and diseases, because it's been a variety of things that have been impacting them, but they think that that's probably what's going on. And that's probably going to be the case for some other species as well. Some other species that grow naturally grow farther south of here are probably going to do better up here now than they used to. There's a number of species from southern Oregon and northern California that they've been planted up here for a number of years and done quite well, and they will probably do even better going into the future with climate change. Should we plan to water new plants often during the summer? So, okay, well, we will get to that in the last part of the presentation about site preparation and planting and maintenance. Another question, how do you select natives for soil that is in a floodplain of highly fertile soil? Is there a way to sort plants, how aggressive they grow? Well, the best teacher is nature. So as I mentioned, if you can find a reference site and see what is doing well in that relatively intact natural landscape, then that's going to tell you what's going to be successful in your unnatural landscape that you're planting. I'll mention as we go through the plants some species that do well in wet soil conditions. Okay, so we better move on because I think most of our questions are going to be pertaining to the next part. Okay, so I'm going to start with trees first, and here's I'll talk about most, if not all, of these trees that I've got listed here. Madrona is one that that's the signature tree for Port Townsend, and fantastic tree. If you want Madrona or Madrone, you're going to have well-drained soil. That's critical for Madrone, Pacific Madrone. But other than that, all you really need is sun. They are very hardy plants, but they do not transplant well. They have a tap root, and they do not like their roots disturbed. They don't do very well in landscapes that are heavily maintained. because of the disturbance and the impacts to their roots. So that's madrone. Now we'll just move on to the evergreens here, the conifers. We've got grand fir and Douglas fir. You're all probably familiar with these. Douglas fir is probably our most common tree, at least conifer. Very fast growing tree, very tolerant of dry growing conditions, and a very fast growing tree, but not tolerant of shade. So the only thing you really need for Douglas fir is sun. If you don't have sun, it's not going to be very successful. In fact, you can see this image right here. You've probably seen this many times when you've been out in the forest. The only live part of the tree is at the very top. That's because everything underneath that has been shaded out and it dies. So if you want an evergreen tree that's going to grow very fast, and you've got a well-drained soil and you've got plenty of sun, Douglas fir is a good choice. A similar looking tree is the grand fir, but grand fir will tolerate shade, at least when it's young. It oftentimes grows up in the shade of other species, and doesn't grow as fast as the Douglas fir does, and prefers a little bit more moisture than Douglas fir can get by with. Both of these are grown as Christmas trees, and this isn't a real good image of a grand fir here, but a classic grand fir is kind of symmetrical, somewhat narrow, classic Christmas tree shape. Two more conifers, the western red cedar and western hemlock. These two prefer shade, and they like a lot more soil moisture than the Douglas fir needs. Although you'll see all four of these species I've mentioned, you'll see them all growing together in similar environments. But as young seedlings, hemlock and cedar really prefer shade. If you plant them out in the full sun, they do not tolerate that very well at all. And I mentioned earlier, I have no answers for the deer. Deer will eat just about anything, but they really do like cedar. That's one of their favorites. And a little tip for if you do want to grow cedar and you have a problem with deer browse, if you plant a Sitka spruce right next to a red cedar, you can the Sitka spruce has very prickly needles, and the deer will come up to browse on the cedar, poke their nose on the spruce, and then walk away. And so the spruce provides some protection to the cedar, and once the cedar gets up tall enough, well established that it can withstand the browse, then you can come in and you can just lop off the spruce, and away you go. And in fact, here is the Sitka spruce. This is one that will grow in floodplain areas where it gets wet. The cedar will also grow in floodplain areas where there's some seasonal flooding, as will the short pine. So both of these trees like sun. The short pine especially needs full sun, but short pine will grow in areas that get flooded in the winter. It'll also grow in sandy, gravelly soils that dry out very quickly. Very hardy tree, and relatively small growing conifer, at least for our native conifers. It doesn't grow as tall. One thing that tends to happen with the short pine is when we get the heavy wet snow, it piles up on the branches. It doesn't shed the snow very well, and large branches will break off on the short pine in a heavy snow. But for the question about what to grow in a floodplain, fertile soils, shore pine, Sitka spruce, western red cedar are good conifers. Okay, I already talked about the madrona, and then Gary oak is similar to the Pacific madrone in terms of the growing conditions that it likes. Full sun, has to have full sun, and well-drained soil. So Gary oak is very slow growing, but it will grow in some very, very dry growing conditions. So Gary oak's kind of the signature tree of Sequim, and madrone is the signature tree of Port Townsend. A lot of people think madrone is a slow growing tree, but if you give it good growing conditions, which would be well-drained soil, but with adequate moisture, it'll grow very fast. But what you oftentimes see it growing in very poor sites where hardly anything else will grow. And obviously in a condition like that, it's not going to grow very fast. But I have it growing at my place in Sequim where I have some good silt loam soil, but I also have some gravelly soil, and I planted it on the edge right between the gravelly and the silt loam soil. And the only thing that grows faster than the madrone is the Douglas fir, and it's not growing a whole lot faster than the madrone is. All right. Maples. We have 3 maples that grow around here. We got the big leaf maple, which I talked about earlier with the issues it's had with climate change. Big leaf maple is a very large tree, big crown, big leaves, a lot of biomass that it produces, nice fall color. You got to have a lot of space if you want to plant big leaf maple. So if you go back to that, the zones, the zone 1, 2, and 3, you're probably gonna, if you want big leaf maple, you're gonna want to plant that out in your zone 3, just because of the space that it takes up and all the leaf litter that it produces, and probably not suitable on a city lot. Whereas the vine maple and the Douglas maple, they're small trees and they are suitable on any type of landscape, city lots, almost anywhere. They are known for, the vine maple is known for its beautiful fall color, orange and yellow, and tends to start getting the fall color in August and keeps that for a couple of months or more before the leaves fall. Douglas maple is very similar to the vine maple. Douglas maple is also called Rocky Mountain maple. It's a little bit hardier than the vine maple. Leaves out about a month earlier than the vine maple does, and the fall color is nice, but not as nice as the vine maple, and loses its leaves usually a little bit sooner than the vine maple does. Vine maple, it likes to have some protection from the wind. It can tolerate shade, it can tolerate pretty dry conditions, but if it's out in the sun, full sun and exposed to the wind, it is not going to be happy at all. Whereas the Douglas maple can take those harsher conditions just fine. And the ideal place for a vine maple is on the south side of some other wooded area, so it gets some protection, but it's also got sun exposure, and the more sun exposure, the better the fall color it gets also. All right. Pacific dogwood and serviceberry, a couple of other small trees. The serviceberry is like the vine maple and the Douglas maple, a nice tidy looking tree, small tree, or sometimes large shrub. Sometimes it's multi-stemmed, and attractive in all seasons. Nice fall color, nice blossoms, handsome foliage in the summertime, produces fruits that the birds really like. You can make jam out of the fruits as well, and juices. Serviceberry is just a really nice plant for pretty much any landscape. And like the vine maple, it does best in a somewhat sheltered location. So if it's got like sun for half the day and protected from the wind, it's really, that's where it's going to be happiest. But it can also grow out in full sun and do just fine. Pacific dogwood is known for those beautiful blossoms. It likes to grow in well-drained soils. It is susceptible to anthracnose, which is wiping out the North American flowering dogwoods. So it's a risky plant to put in because of that fungal disease that it's getting. A couple of elderberries that we have, the red elderberry and the blue elderberry. Now, these have their place in landscapes, but I would not consider them very suitable for city lot situations, mainly because they're kind of messy trees. They're small trees. The red elderberry is typically multi-stemmed. They lose a lot of branches each year, and you know, all deciduous trees and shrubs look, you know, when they don't have their leaves, they're just bare stems. But the elderberries, especially the red elderberry, looks like a bunch of sticks in the wintertime. So I have these at my place. I have an acre and a quarter, and so I've got room for all of these things. But I don't have this in anywhere where I'm going to be looking at it every day in the wintertime out my kitchen window or something like that. I tuck it in with other species, and then you know, you get the blossoms on the red elderberry early in the spring, which are nice and good for pollinators, and then you got the fruits that the birds really like. The blue elderberry, it blooms in the summertime, and the fruits don't mature until into the fall. So and they both are great for wildlife. But from a aesthetic perspective, they're not, in my opinion, not very ornamental. Same with the Pacific crabapple. It's you can see it here. It's a very wild, kind of messy looking tree. But nice blossoms, fruits that, like the blue elderberry, mature in the summertime, and mature in the fall. So really important for migrating birds. It's a good food source. The Pacific crabapple is a good one for wet areas. So again, the floodplains. This is one that we find growing like in the Chimicum Valley. It's very common deciduous tree in the Chimicum Valley. And both of these are fairly small trees, or all three of these are. The blue elderberry grows more out in the open and a little bit taller, more tree-like. Than the red elderberry tends to grow more in wooded areas and more multi-stem like. Okay, we'll move on to shrubs here, and then at the end of the shrubs section, then we can do a question and answer. Here we've got our Pacific rhododendron, another classic Port Townsend species in our state flower. I'm not going to talk about the evergreen huckleberry or salal, but rhododendron, huckleberry, evergreen huckleberry, salal, and the Oregon grapes, they're all broadleaf evergreens, which important to note. They're really good for certain parts of your landscape because they're going to stay green all year long. And rhododendron, huckleberry, and salal, they all like a lot of organic matter in the soil. Lots of mulch. If you don't have a lot of organic matter, mulch is going to be good for everything, but it's especially important for these three. and they like pretty acidic soils as well. Okay, the harbinger of spring is Indian plum, also known as osoberry, deciduous shrub. Its ideal growing conditions are in the understory of deciduous trees. It leaves out usually in late February and blooms in late February. So it's leafed out if it's in the understory of deciduous trees, maybe a couple of months or more before the overstory is. And then it produces these clusters of fruits, and you'll have various colors in the cluster when they're fully mature, which at my place I have a lot of these. I never see them fully mature because once they start to get about mature, then the cedar waxwings come and gobble them up. But when they are fully mature, they're dark plum color. They look just like Italian plums. They're really tiny, but they're almost identical to miniature Italian plums in appearance. So really nice to have these to brighten up an otherwise dull-looking landscape in late winter when you can't wait for spring to come. Well, when they start to leaf out, you know spring's right around the corner. And then shortly after that, usually in March, the red flowering currant will bloom. And red flowering currant blooms for a couple of months. It'll bloom from March to almost to May, and depending on if you have different microclimates on your property, you will have red flowering currant blooming throughout that entire time. The hummingbirds love the red flowering currant. It's really easy to grow. All it needs is sun and well-drained soil. It will not tolerate wet feet though. So if you've got a situation with seasonally saturated soils, wet soils, the red flowering currant is probably not going to do well there. Sandy, gravelly soil, well-drained soil, red flowering currant will do fine. The more sun you have, the more blossoms you're going to get, and then it also has fruits that attract the birds. Again, the cedar waxwings really like the fruits of the red flowering currant. And with both of these, or any of these species that produce fruits that the birds like, chances are you'll have volunteers that will be sprouting up in your landscape. The birds eat the fruits and then spread the seeds throughout your landscape. The Oregon grapes, we've got the tall Oregon grape and the low Oregon grape. They have essentially the same yellow blossoms, clusters of blossoms that are attractive in early spring. Tall Oregon grape blooms a little bit earlier than the low Oregon grape, usually in mid to late March. The fruits look the same on both. Just they look like Concord grapes. That's where they get why they're called Oregon grape. Birds love the fruits on these, and you can make jelly if you add a ton of sugar to the juice. Makes a good jelly. They do spread. So you plant in one Oregon grape, and in one spot you're going to have more Oregon grapes sprouting up. They'll spread from the roots and send up new plants. The low Oregon grape does the same thing, but low usually grows only about knee high or so, and you typically grow the low Oregon grape as a ground cover, so you want it to spread. The low Oregon grape likes a little more shade than sun, and the tall likes a little more sun than shade, but they're both pretty adaptable to both conditions, and they can grow in some pretty poor soil conditions, but they do not like, again, they don't like the wet soil. So low fertility, sandy or well-drained soil is good for the Oregon grape. Moving along into late spring, early summer, we've got mock orange and ocean spray will bloom at that time of the year. Both of these are very fragrant. The I can't describe the fragrance on the ocean spray. It's pretty unique. The mock orange, it gets its name because it smells like orange blossoms. Very, very fragrant. And they're both very easy to grow. Shrubs that grow maybe 10 feet tall and wide, approximately on average. They can grow in some pretty dry conditions. The more sun you have, the more blossoms you'll get. The ocean spray is a little more tolerant of shade than mock orange is. One downside of ocean spray, all these beautiful clusters of blossoms turn into clusters of seeds, and they persist well into the next year. So the plant loses all its leaves, but it keeps all these clusters of seeds through the winter, through the spring, and all the way until after it starts leafing out again in the following spring and into the summer. So not that big of a deal, but if you have it out there as a specimen that you're going to be looking at every day in the wintertime, it's going to look like a dead shrub with cobwebs on it. Okay, a couple of plants that spread like the Oregon grape does, thimbleberry and Nootka rose. Thimbleberry both of these will grow in a variety of soils and sun exposures. Thimbleberry prefers more sun than shade. Thimbleberry does not have thorns. It has big, soft, exotic looking, almost tropical looking leaves. Very coarse texture to it. And like I said, it spreads, but not aggressively, but you got to keep that in mind. It's going to send up new plants and move around. Nootka rose, I would use with caution. Nootka rose is, it spreads and spreads aggressively, and it's very thorny. And once you have Nootka rose, you probably can't get rid of it, and very difficult to keep in check. It has these nice fragrant blossoms and the attractive hips there. And here's snowberry that is very similar to the Nootka rose, and that'll grow in sun or shade, wet or dry, and spreads. It's a thicket former. And snowberry gets the name from the white fruits that it produces there. And it looks real nice here next to this bench, but this is what snowberry looks like in the wintertime when it loses its leaves. Now, if you want to grow a hedge, the combination of snowberry and Nootka rose makes a very good hedge, and that's what you see here. It's nice. You got a nice contrast to the red hips and the rose, and the white berries on the snowberry. The previous year's growth on the Nootka rose is reddish colored, and then the kind of dull gray color on the snowberry. They contrast nicely. So makes a nice hedge, but you have to mow alongside it regularly, otherwise it's just going to keep growing outward and out of control. So if you're willing to keep it mowed back on the sides, then that's a good choice for a hedge. Okay, a couple of plants for wet areas. Pacific ninebark and black twinberry. Black twinberry, it's a bush honeysuckle actually. Both of these will grow 10 to 15 feet tall and wide. The black twinberry has these pair of trumpet-shaped yellow blossoms, and it blooms spring through the summer. And then the fruits are these two black berries, and the madrone or maroon bracts around. And I think the fruits are more attractive than the blossoms, more conspicuous. But you'll have both blossoms and fruits on the black twinberry in the summertime because it just keeps blooming all summer long. Okay, and then the 9-bark, on the other hand, it's got this snowball-shaped blossom that only lasts about a week, and then it turns brown and goes to seed. So very short bloom period, and that's usually late spring, early summer that 9-bark blooms. But both of these will grow in very wet conditions, as does the red osier dogwood. Red osier dogwood gets its name, it's also called red stem dogwood because of the red stems. That's its what it's known for, and there are many cultivars of dogwoods. They're yellow stem and red stem, and they grow throughout the northern hemisphere. But what I really like about the red osier dogwood is the fall color, which you can see here. You get various shades of red and purple, really nice looking fall color. And then after it loses the leaves, then you've got the red stems. And during the summertime, it has nice looking foliage as well. Again, it grows well in wet areas, places that are seasonally ponded, and then in dry out in the summertime, the dogwood can tolerate that. And pretty easy to propagate from hardwood cuttings too. So like I said, it grows throughout the northern hemisphere, but your best chances of success are if you can find a native dogwood growing nearby where you live. You can go out there now through probably through the middle of March and prune off some branches and stick them in the ground, and as long as there's moisture there, they'll probably root, and you've got new plants. All right, just a little bit of information about some plants that I recommend you be very careful with here. And I talked about each one of these except the hawthorn. The problem with the hawthorn is it has black hawthorn has really big thorns. It's very thorny, has nice fall color and nice blossoms, but you probably don't want that anywhere near where you're going to be rubbing up against it. Willows, they tend to grow fast and be messy and drop lots of limbs and branches. As does the cottonwood and the alder. Both of these grow very, very fast. They've got their place in the landscape, but definitely not in zone 1, probably not even zone 2. I would keep those out where they've got plenty of room to grow and fall over in a windstorm and drop branches. They're both really good for wildlife. They're hosts for a lot of caterpillars, so really important in that respect. But they're pretty abundant out in our natural areas as well. And then quaking aspen and bitter cherry, they like the snowberry and the Nootka rose are thicket formers. They spread, the roots spread out and send up new trees. And if they don't have any competition, they're going to just grow outward and take up more and more territory. So be very mindful of that. If you want to plant either one of these, they're going to spread and they're going to take over a lot of territory. They're going to search out a drain field. They're going to cross over to the neighbors. They can cause some problems. Okay, any questions about plants? We've got one here in the chat. I see. Any suggestions on establishing a roadside native hedgerow? Snowberry, Nootka rose, Oregon grapes. Okay, yeah, well, as I mentioned, the snowberry, Nootka rose are good. The thimbleberry is a good one. It's good for hedgerows to have a foundation of a thicket forming species, one that will fill in all the voids. So the rose, the snowberry, Oregon grape, although not quite as well as the other two, thimbleberry, salmonberry, And then it's always nice to throw in maybe for a little diversity here and there, and depending on how big your hedgerow is, but and what soil type you have, but maybe a serviceberry, maybe the crabapple, depending on soil type. Add a little bit more diversity to your hedgerow if it's big. Ordered Pacific dogwood to plant as a way to hide a neighboring property. However, I just found out where I wanted to plant them is actually not on my property. Can I cancel just the dogwood part of the order? Yes, I think we can accommodate that. So Pacific dogwood is usually one that would be planted like as an individual specimen tree anyway. The red osier dogwood, on the other hand, it's best if it's planted as a mass. Then you really get the effect of the fall color, and the red stems is much more noticeable when you've got a mass of the red osier dogwood. How come you don't sell ferns as native plants? Okay, well, because we do bare root because that's easiest to do, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I think maybe years ago we did do ferns and evergreen huckleberry, and they came in plugs. They were a lot of work to bundle them up, and mortality was kind of high. So we are doing salal. They're in bundles of 5. Everything else is in bundles of 10. But anything that isn't bare root is a little more cumbersome for us to deal with. Okay, we will move on to the last section here because we're running late. Here are your options for different for getting plants. You can get seed, you can get cuttings. Only certain species are suitable for cuttings. Bare root, plugs, potted, balled, and burlap. I'm going to just talk about the bare root. Other than I will mention that around here, if you have water that you can water your plants, you can plant potted and balled and burlap stock any time of the year, whereas the bare root stock can only be purchased and planted in the wintertime. So here I want to point out that the ideal time to plant is in the fall. Okay, and this is a graph of precipitation. This is SQUIM, but it just the patterns what matters here. Pattern is the same in Jefferson County as it is in SQUIM. It starts raining in October, rains and snows throughout the winter time, and then stops raining and rains very little during the summertime. And so if you plant out, you plant in late winter or early spring, the soil is really cold. The roots are not going to want to start growing in that cold soil. The plant is coming out of dormancy, and the rains are stopping. So everything's difficult if you plant then. If you plant in October, the soil is still warm. The roots are gonna start growing. It's gonna get established while the plant is going into dormancy, and the rains are coming to take care of all your watering needs. Okay, so ideally, you're gonna be planting in the fall, unless you have no problem in taking care of your plants when you plant them in their ultimate destination. Then you might as well go ahead and plant them in the spring, because especially if you're getting bare root plants, because your alternative is as I'm going to talk about here shortly, is you pot them up, and you got to take care of them when they're potted up. So here's just a little bit briefly about bare root and plug stock. The advantages: they tend to be inexpensive, they're lightweight and easy to plant. That if you're buying something mail order, a plant mail order, chances are it's going to be bare root because they ship well, and they tend to establish fairly quickly. The disadvantage is only certain species are available as bare root, and you can only get them when they're dormant. So only in the wintertime is when bare root stock is available. And because they don't have any soil around their roots, they are vulnerable to desiccation, and you got to be ready to take care of them. So if you do buy bare root stock, this is what you need to do. You want to get them planted as soon as possible, either in their permanent location, and if that's going to work for you, where you're going to be able to take care of them throughout the first growing season, paying close attention to them because they're going to need a lot of care during that first growing season, or you pot them up or heal them in. But one way or another, you got to get the roots covered. And if you can't plant them immediately, you can store them for a week or so. Store them in a cool, dark place where they're not going to freeze, and where the roots aren't going to dry out. And then when you go out to plant them, put them in a bucket of water, let them soak to rehydrate. And what I like to do is I usually, this shows one plant in one bucket. There's a lot of roots there, but the plants you get from us you could fit several in one bucket of water. Put them in there, go out and dig up all your holes, go in and take a break, and then come back out, and then go out and one by one go out and plant them. And dig the hole wide, but not too deep. If you dig it too deep, then you can have some settling, and that can expose the roots. And if you got like one long root on the plant, instead of trying to cram it into a hole that's too small for it, it's better to prune that long root off. Partially backfill, it's best to not add any amendments to the soil for the native plants, and just use the native soil that you've got. If you got really rocky ground and you dig a hole like this and you end up with this pile of rocks and no soil, well, obviously you're going to have add some topsoil to the mix. But what you want to avoid doing is creating a situation where this one little tiny spot where the plant gets put in the ground is good soil, and surrounded by very different soil that isn't good, then the roots aren't going to want to leave that. It's going to be like in a pot, and the roots just stay right there. Okay, and if you water as you're backfilling, then you'll fill any air pockets and get it totally backfilled and to the depth that it was grown in the nursery, and put a little ridge of soil around the planting hole so that the water will stay there when you add water to it. Mulch, and if you're planting in a grassy area, it's a good idea to use plant protectors. Those are those plastic cones that you put around the plants. That does two things. It keeps voles out. So voles that grow in grassy habitats, they have a tendency to girdle the plants. But they won't do that if it doesn't take much for a plant protector, and they'll avoid them. But another big problem with growing plants out in a grassy area is you plant those, say in early March, and then you go out there in late April to check on them and give them some water, and you can't find them because the grass has grown up. So you get the weed whacker out and you start cutting down the grass, and you find your plants with your weed whacker, which is not a fun thing to do. This just shows you the different mistakes that commonly happen as plants get put in the ground, and this is the way you want to be doing it. And I know everybody looks at this and says, well, duh, yeah, we know that, but When you're planting 30 or 40 plants, you tend to get a little impatient and cut corners, and these things will happen, and that'll result in high mortality. The type of site preparation can be hand scalping like this, where you just cut out the sod in an area just where the one individual plant's going to go. You can cultivate a larger area to try to eradicate all the competing vegetation. But my preference is sheet composting. So here's sheet composting on a large scale with heavy equipment. Sheet composting is can be done different ways, but the common way is you cut the existing vegetation as short as possible, lay down cardboard or construction paper works too. It comes in rolls. You can lay down rolls of construction paper, and then you cover that with mulch, at least 4 inches of mulch, and that'll smother all that competing vegetation, existing vegetation that's out there, and then it decomposes, the sod decomposes, improves the soil, inhibits weed growth, and conserves moisture, and increases organic matter and fertility, makes it the growing conditions much better for your desirable plants. Now, if you got a situation where you're doing a lot of this, you probably aren't going to be able to come up with enough cardboard or construction paper for this. You don't have to use that, but you probably want to double the depth of your mulch in order to smother out the vegetation and not have too many weeds that sprout up in there. The one big downside of sheet composting is it takes a lot of labor to spread all this mulch out. And I recommend, if you're going to do a large area, that you have the material hauled in. If you don't have a little tractor, you hire someone that has a little tractor to spread it, and it'll be done in short order and save you a lot of back pain. And you know, if you do this now, then you'll have a perfect, or sometime in the next few months, you'll have a perfect situation for planting in the fall, and probably not have to do hardly any maintenance at all for your new plantings. Now, if you can't plant out or do not want to plant out immediately in the spring or late winter when you get your plants, then your option is to pot them up or heel them in. And this is going to be especially important if you're planting, if the final destination for your plants is somewhere where you can't easily maintain them. So then pot them up. You can get pots ahead of time, get potting mix, and you could use just straight potting mix, or you can stretch the potting mix by adding some topsoil or compost and topsoil. But you don't want to use just plain topsoil. That's not real good for potting plants up in. And then select a location where it's protected from the wind and sun, but has a ready source of water right nearby, so you can water them throughout the summertime, because the potted plants are going to have to be watered regularly when it gets hot and dry. And also somewhere where you're not going to forget about them. Here you can see a couple of examples of plants that have been in pots for way too long, and this is pretty common. I've seen this a lot of places where the roots have grown out the holes in the pots and into the ground, and people never did get them into their permanent locations. So potting is considered temporary, and if you can't pot them up, or you just want to get the roots covered for a few weeks until you can get them out into their permanent homes, you can heel them in. Just pick a place where it's easy digging and protected from the wind and sun and easy to water, and again where you won't forget them. And the idea is you just kept covering those roots for a short period of time. Okay, maintenance. Mulch is your best insurance. Conserves moisture, keeps soil temperatures moderated, inhibits competing vegetation, improves the soil. So mulch is really, really helpful. Figure on, depending on your site conditions, that you may have to irrigate for the first 2 or 3 growing seasons. And when you do irrigate, what you want to do is you want to irrigate deeply but infrequently. So what you're trying to do is encourage the roots to grow out into the native soil. So soak the entire root system and then wait for it to dry out entirely before you water it again. By doing that, then it'll encourage those roots to keep growing farther and deeper. Okay, and just a little tip to close things out with here for natural landscaping, something called cues to care. If you do want to do this natural landscaping style, a way to make it work well is to add in little features that tell the observer that what they see is intentional. It's a managed landscape. It's supposed to be the way you see it. So you think about when you go out in natural areas, you tend to not judge what you're seeing. You accept what's there. But in managed landscapes, we tend to be a little more judgmental. But if you say you just put in a split rail fence, then that tells the observer that this what's on the other side is supposed to be the way it is. It may be completely unmaintained, but it's supposed to be that way, and that works. Put a pathway through, and it tells the observer that this is everything here is intentional and managed. You can add bird boxes, other human elements to the landscape, and it just helps to indicate that well, it sets expectations. Okay, where can you get plants? Well, I've talked about our plant sale. I won't talk about that anymore, but other than the fact that we're taking orders through January 28th, order online, and then the plants will be available on February 26th. But again, we sell in bundles of 10. If you want just a few plants, go to the nurseries, and you may say, well, yeah, but they don't sell native plants. Well, they will if people ask for them. So they'll stock what people want to buy. And if nobody asks for them, they don't think anyone wants to buy the native plants. So don't just go in there and look, and when you don't see what you want, leave. Tell them what you want. They can get it. There are wholesale nurseries that specialize in native plants, and most, if not all, of our local nurseries, they buy from wholesale nurseries, so they can get it. And if you have more questions, feel free to send me an email. Here's my email here. I'll try to answer any questions that I wasn't able to answer here today, or if you think of something else later. And then I'm hoping, so I did this for years and years at Clallam Conservation District. Each spring and fall, I would do a native plant field workshop. So that was basically this whole section on with the slides of the trees and shrubs. Instead of slides, we would walk out in a natural area and see them in live and in person, and go through all that out in the field. So I'm hoping that COVID will let us do that again. Hopefully this spring. It would probably be in April when we would do that. And then I've taught for several years a natural landscaping course, which was 3 lectures, essentially what we covered tonight, but in over 3 lectures and 3 field trips. So again, I'm hoping that I'll be able to start doing that. I don't know about this spring, but let's hope that that this fall we'll be able to start doing that again. And questions, we got plant skid will keep browsing ungulates from nibbling on the seedlings. This may be sprayed on the seedling or scattered as granules on the ground for rabbits and rodents. This product is used in Scandinavia on commercial planted conifers. So plant skid, SKYYD. All right, I was not aware of that. Can you explain why the plant sale delivers in spring when planting is best in fall? Yes, because we only do bare root plants, and the only time you can get bare root plants is when they're dormant, which is in the winter time. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any more questions. We're just a couple minutes, 3 minutes past 8 o'clock, so we almost got there in time. Again, if anything else comes up, feel free to shoot me an email and I will do my best to answer. All right, everybody have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.